There are 1.8 billion people that are unbanked globally right now. How many of those 1.8 billion people could be the next Einstein, and we just aren't unlocking their potential because they couldn't buy their first physics textbook? So, I'm not the kind of guy that's like the dollar is going to collapse tomorrow. In fact, I think Bitcoin and holding Bitcoin as a strategic reserve gives us the ability to protect from downside risks of monetary collapse. And ultimately, if I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon, but it's possible that at a certain point we go, okay, maybe we should start backing the dollar with things like Bitcoin to reinstill trust into it, to reinstill value in the dollar. So I think Bitcoin and the dollar can very much work together, and especially, a lot of Bitcoiners don't like to hear this, but
all right, Dennis. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it's a big week. It's a big couple of months. We are in election season. But before we get into the current election and Bitcoin playing a part in it, let's zoom out and talk about your work with the Satoshi Action Fund and the work you've been doing on a state-by-state basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Satoshi Action launched in June of 2022. So for context, it's a nonprofit, and what we work to do is to make the United States the best place in the world for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining through policy and education. We educate lawmakers, regulators, at the state level and at the federal level to ensure that they understand the true potential of the technology. In fact, recently we switched that to be our mission because we feel that at this point, the United States is now the leader in the world on Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. I figured that out when I started calling around to some folks. We were having a lot of successes and started to get some inbound from international groups who wanted our help on being able to advance good policy and education in their countries. And I was like, oh yeah, our mission statement is we want to make the United States the best place in the world for Bitcoin. They're like, Dennis, the United States is the best place in the world for Bitcoin. So we've recently updated our mission, and because we have accomplished mission number one, mission number two is to truly unlock the potential of Bitcoin. There's so many incredible things that Bitcoin can do that we know Bitcoin can do, but it's not quite achieving its height because it's held back by things like capital gains tax, all right? Or we don't have the proper energy policies to be able to truly unlock the potential of Bitcoin mining to balance the grid. So these are things we care a lot about at Satoshi Action. We've had a ton of success being able to push our agenda forward, and we're looking forward to 2024 where we'll continue to win for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, and maybe even spread to do some international work as well.
Nice. Yes. So I remember you were speaking at Mining Disrupt in 2023, last summer. And one point that you made that stuck out to me was that in the beginning, you guys took the approach of going state by state as modeled after the way that cannabis got legalization in America.
That's correct.
So yeah, could you talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. So, the cannabis industry has struggled more than any industry in recent memory, even more than Bitcoin. We like to say that Bitcoin has it tough, but it's not a federal crime to possess Bitcoin. It's not a federal crime to have a cannabis business, a Bitcoin business, and so we want to make sure that it stays that way for Bitcoin. But in the cannabis industry, they've dealt with lack of banking, lack of ability to legally operate until the cannabis industry decided to turn things around a little bit and focus on the state level instead. They tried at the federal level for a very long time, and ultimately it wasn't working for them. And so they started to go to the state level to advocate for their cause. In 2012, Colorado and Washington became the two first states in the country to legalize cannabis. And since then, they've gone on to have pro-cannabis policies be passed in 75% plus of the country so far. And it started in blue states, but now it's migrated to red states as well. So we're following that same exact strategy. We're going to the states and we're advocating for the benefits of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, balancing the grid, enhancing renewables, creating rural jobs. These are all things that lawmakers know that they want. We don't have to convince them that they want more jobs, right? And so we pitch that to the lawmakers. They see the value of that. And we're starting in the red states, so sort of the opposite of the cannabis industry. We've already seen that there's a thirst and an appetite for these types of policies in purple states. And in 2025, we plan to have our first fully blue state introduce our policy and hopefully pass it into law. That policy does things like protect the right to mine, protect the right to self-custody, protect the right to run a node. It's part of our Bitcoin rights package that we try to pass into law. So very exciting times. And ultimately, our goal is not just to pass it at the state level, but to also influence up the food chain, right? Ours is a bottom-up approach, not a top-down approach. Going to Washington, D.C. is a top-down approach to policy. Nothing wrong with it. I think people should do it, just not our approach and how we see things. And we're already seeing the benefits of our bottom-up approach, which is that not only do we see states that we're passing laws in, but other lawmakers in other states are reaching out to us, and other countries are reaching out to us and saying, okay, we want to do this ourselves as well. In fact, 2 states this year introduced our policy, and we never even gave them a ring. They just saw that it got done in Arkansas, Montana, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, and they said, okay, we want to do that too as well. And I think one of the biggest wins for us on this bottom-up approach is that after we put these ideas into the bloodstream, like right to mine and right to self-custody, we saw the GOP recently update their platform. They had a crypto plank. For reference, when the GOP or the DNC puts together their party platform, they have a plank for each policy issue. And they created a crypto plank, and under that crypto plank, it said that they are going to protect the right to mine and the right to self-custody, which is verbatim coming from Satoshi Action Policy. So that was a huge win for us, an exciting win, not one that we expected. So we're glad to see that our model and our approach to the way we're thinking about these things is working ahead of schedule, so to speak.
Yeah. And so now it's obvious you guys have a lot of momentum. Like, as you said, states are actually just taking this policy and implementing it themselves. But I'm sure it wasn't that way when you first started. So in the beginning, what was it? What did you have to do to crack these doors open? How did you get your first inroads?
Yeah, I mean, it's different everywhere you go, right? So when you want to get a lawmaker to be interested in the model policy that you have to present, you have to figure out in part what matters to them. I think a big thing too is determining states and locations where there are lawmakers that already have a propensity for this type of legislation. So they could have introduced a Bitcoin or digital asset bill in the past. And so you can see that on record and go, okay, maybe we should give this guy a call and see if he's interested in our bill. And oftentimes lawmakers are, because they lack the resources, oftentimes at the state level, to be able to build good policy. I mean, we'll go to states where these are part-time legislators, sometimes volunteers, not even getting paid. And the staff that they're able to retain is minimal, if non-existent. So how are they supposed to do the research and the development of policy without anybody there to help them, without a true expert on the issue? So what we do is we put ourselves in as the expert on that issue, and we help them understand the value not only of the technology, but of the policy that we're trying to push forward. So it can be a little bit different every time, but generally that's how we approach it. We try to find states and lawmakers that have a high propensity or interest in this type of legislation, get them to introduce it, and then we start working it through the process alongside them.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, you're sort of like a professional orange pillar, right? I mean, that could be your alternative job title.
Maybe a professional politician orange pillar.
Yeah, exactly, yes. And I remember hearing you say that you have sort of a shotgun approach when you're finally able to talk to these people one-on-one and just spout out a bunch of different things about Bitcoin and see what sticks. So, yes,
it can feel like that. I mean, when you go, so usually that first lawmaker that you're trying to get them to introduce the bill, you have a little more time. You can get 15, 30 minutes or an hour with them where you're explaining Bitcoin. Maybe they already understand Bitcoin to an extent, and then explaining the policy. But you don't just need to win over one lawmaker. You need to win over, at least a majority of the legislature to be able to have the support to pass it. So when we go into those meetings, so first we get it introduced, right? And then we go to the state, we fly in for our meetings, and we set up back-to-back meetings. But most of these lawmakers, these time windows for when they're at the Capitol are very short. So most states only have 2, 3, 4 month long legislative sessions. Well, there's hundreds of bills they're trying to pass. So you get a meeting with them, but sometimes I've had 60 seconds before with a lawmaker, right? So you get 60 seconds to 5 minutes, maybe a little longer if you're lucky, to pitch it. And so when you're doing it, you're like trying to quickly figure out what they're going to latch onto and what they're going to understand or agree upon with regards to Bitcoin. So you just start spitting out like, this is what Bitcoin can do. It's good for self-custody. It's good for financial inclusion. It can balance the grid. And then it's eventually what happens is they're, what was that? I like balance the grid. What do you tell me more about that? How does it balance the grid? Because oftentimes you'll say things, or we will say things as a team that they've never heard before. They think, Bitcoin is just some asset that you people buy and they speculate on. They don't understand the true potential of the technology. So we try to, as quickly as possible, highlight some of those benefits. And then oftentimes what happens is they ask, questions about how does that work? Mm-hmm. And because we're experts on Bitcoin, as far as explaining it to politicians at least, we do a very good job of helping them understand what Bitcoin can do for them and their state. I think the grid balancing one is the most popular by far. But that's the shotgun approach that we take, and it usually works pretty well.
Nice. And so you've had success with the red states and now some with the blue states. So Bitcoin is different things to different people, right? And obviously different things to different politicians. So give us the view of how Republicans view Bitcoin and how Democrats view Bitcoin and how you can bring them all together.
Sure. I mean, on the Democrat side, it's very easy, right? You have Bitcoin as a financially inclusive tool that can help the marginalized and those that are traditionally excluded from the financial system to be able to finally be banked. There are 1.8 billion people that are unbanked globally right now. there are 1.8 billion people that don't have the ability to afford to buy a house, let alone maybe even afford groceries for next week. They don't have access to true savings technologies. And so what I tell lawmakers that have an interest in the social good of Bitcoin, typically that is those on the left, but not always, some on the right as well. But that how many of those 1.8 billion people could be the next Einstein, and we just aren't unlocking their potential because they couldn't buy their first physics textbook. So that's a really compelling message to Democrats and progressives and those on the left who really care about the ability for people to have financial access and be included in the system. On the right, I mean, it's, ultimately the right really cares about this idea of sound money, and that Bitcoin is a way to create a checks and balance on the federal system. Today, the federal government, can print unlimited money and will be able to into the future. And there's not a great way to measure how much inflation or monetary debasement is taking place. And so Bitcoin is a really great way to show direct, real time how much money is being printed and give people an opportunity to avoid that type of monetary debasement. So those are really quick. There's, you can go more on the left and more on the right on both of those. On the energy issue, it's pretty simple for Republicans. It's like Bitcoin mining is a tool to advance energy, full stop. On the left, it's a little different. You're going to want to talk a little more about how Bitcoin mining can help enhance renewables and mitigate methane emissions, which are issues that they care a lot about. And in fact, I think we're going to enter a period where we stop debating whether or not we should Bitcoin, right? Today, it's like some people think we should, some people think we shouldn't. And we are headed towards, in my opinion, an era where we will see sides fight, but not over whether or not we should Bitcoin, but instead how we should do Bitcoin. So the energy conversation is a clear line where you'll see that type of debate. Democrats are going to want to see more green energy. Republicans are going to probably just say all the above when it comes to energy.
Mm-hmm. And so that brings us to the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. You made some headlines in the last week leading up to this conference saying that Trump may very well announce this at this weekend. And so what do you think that means for the U.S. to create a Bitcoin Strategic Reserve? What would it mean for politics in this country and ultimately the dollar?
Now, I wanted to quickly interrupt today's interview to give a massive shout out to our lead sponsor, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is a Bitcoin banking solution that combines traditional financial services with the power of Bitcoin. Created by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners, Rhino offers a range of different services. You can buy Bitcoin, you can sell Bitcoin, you can withdraw straight to cold storage, and you can even pay other people using the Bitcoin Lightning Network. You can also purchase gift cards with sats at the click of a button, and you can even connect a multi-signature setup to Casa, all by using the Rhino application. Additionally, you can even send cash globally to your family and friends using Rhino, and soon you'll be able to pay bills, borrow money against your Bitcoin, and even save Bitcoin for your retirement, all in the one seamless application. You guys can visit rhinobitcoin.com to download Rhino today and experience the future of Bitcoin banking.
I think ultimately it's a very good step towards the United States being able to secure itself far into the future. Today we have runaway monetary debasement across the world, and we don't have a true way to measure that or protect ourselves from it. I'm not the kind of guy that's like the dollar is going to collapse tomorrow. In fact, I think Bitcoin and holding Bitcoin as a strategic reserve gives us the ability to protect from downside risks of monetary collapse. And ultimately, if I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon, but it's possible that at a certain point we go, okay, maybe we should start backing the dollar with things like Bitcoin to reinstill trust into it, to reinstill value in the dollar. So I think Bitcoin and the dollar can very much work together, and especially a lot of Bitcoiners don't like to hear this, but things like stable coins are really going to help extend the dollar as well. So I don't think we're going to enter a period anytime soon where the dollar is going away. I think that these technologies can work in tandem, and we can create a soft landing for the future that we all know is possible.
Yes. And do you think there's a fear of Bitcoin becoming partisan because it has been adopted by one party and not the other in this election?
A lot of people thought that. A lot of people thought, well, if Trump is pro-Bitcoin and the GOP is pro-Bitcoin, is that going to scare some Democrats away? And I'm sure that to an extent there may be a little bit of that. But in fact, the opposite is what is happening. We are seeing where Trump became, adamantly pro-Bitcoin. All of a sudden, a lot of the Democrats that were quietly pro-Bitcoin are, feeling an urgency and a need to get out there in front of this issue. So the moment Trump became pro-Bitcoin, you saw this reaction where Ro Khanna, Mark Cuban, and some other Democrats put together a roundtable with the Biden administration so that they could help educate them on the value of this technology and why they should be favorable towards it, and the problems that Gary Gensler is causing for them, to the industry writ large. But that I don't think would have happened unless Trump would have been championing Bitcoin. So in a way, although it could be perceived as becoming partisan, I think in fact it is putting fire under the ass, so to speak, of those on the left that are really concerned about it becoming partisan. Now they have a real reason to be like, oh my gosh, we weren't working fast enough or hard enough. We need to double our efforts on convincing Democrats and progressives to understand and appreciate Bitcoin.
And it does feel like this perfect storm where Bitcoin has now been around for 15 years and it's grown to $1 trillion+ asset. And so now there's actual real financial backing that can go into these elections, right? And so we've got Coinbase raising $200 million for their super PAC, something like that. So yeah, talk about the PACs and how they're influencing this whole thing.
Yeah, there's a big influence of money in politics. Unfortunately, I wish that wasn't true. In fact, I used to be a big anti, big money in politics kind of guy. But at the end of the day, this is just where we're at politically. And in order to get your agenda across, it does seem that you need to be in the money raising world. We don't personally engage in raising money for super PACs. We generally stay out of elections as far as raising money is concerned for candidates. Not that we're against it, just generally something that we've stayed away from. But groups like Coinbase and others have raised alongside other companies like Gemini. The Winklevoss twins are very interested in this kind of stuff. Millions and millions of dollars. I think Fairshake, which is a super PAC on crypto, it's really a crypto PAC, but it's raised about $200 million for Senate races, congressional races, but Senate is the biggest focus. And they are interested in using that as a way to say, hey, if you have a chance, you can be pro-Bitcoin, you can decide you want to support this industry, but if you don't, then we're going to spend money on your opponents. And so that's driven quite a bit of interest in turning a new leaf on the technology, for sure.
And Trump, of course, he says a lot of things, but the idea, will he follow through with them? Looking past this November, how do you think Bitcoin is going to fundamentally just embed itself within America, its politics, and moving forward?
Yeah,
what do you see?
There's an interesting trend that I have noticed in politics, which is that when you become a highly regulated or highly attacked industry, you become very interested in the political process. This is something that I saw coming for some time for Bitcoin. And instead of just saying, well, that's bound to happen, we'll just assume that, that maybe we have to flee America, right? I decided to get back up and fight and be able to make people understand why we should lead on this technology instead of fearing it so much. But ultimately, because of the level of attacks, the level of regulation, anyone that's in the Bitcoin industry or crypto industry writ large is going to have a very strong interest in being very engaged in the political process, because there's so much economic interest, and two, I think a lot of Bitcoiners really view this as a moral or ethical issue as well, because Bitcoin fixes so many of the problems that we see in the world today, and that even if we don't make any money at all, like fighting for that, those changes is worth fighting for alone. It just so happens that the rebellion also is getting rich at the same time, which is a really unique dynamic with Bitcoin. But I do think long-term that the general Bitcoin crypto folks that are interested in being politically engaged are only going to become more politically engaged. You see this as an example, we do a lot of energy stuff at Satoshi Action. We work on a lot of energy policy, and the utilities are currently right now regulated predominantly by public utility commissions at the state level. But because they're so highly regulated, they're regulated monopolies, they're practically quasi-government. Because they're so highly regulated, they live and breathe the state capitol. When we go to the state capitol in most states, there is no more powerful entity than, in the lobbying game than these utilities. And then oftentimes you see this rotating door where the lobbyists from the public utility commissions are kind of switching position. Very, very, very common. So you'll probably see the same thing happen with Bitcoin. You'll probably see Bitcoiners get appointed, crypto people get appointed to federal roles, especially if Trump ends up winning.
Mm-hmm. And so we're 3 months out from the election. What does that mean for you? I know you're in the air all the time, but what's your schedule look like over the next 90 days?
Oh man, the timeline is like, time is warping right now, and the series of events and the speed of events and the velocity of these political events is just like, it's really hard, just starting to get difficult to stay up to date. But ultimately, we're going to stick to our agenda of continuing to get these good ideas into the political bloodstream. Things like right to mine, things like right to self-custody. We want to see the protections for nodes as well. There's a number of other things, right to peer-to-peer transactions. That's going to be a huge, huge one. But we want to continue to do that. We also have our eyes on what's going on in Washington, D.C. We've got a lot of people in our team who've either worked in D.C. or currently work in D.C., because of other work that they do. So we certainly have eyeballs on how we could be helpful in Washington if given the opportunity.
Yeah. And so how big is your organization now?
Yeah, we've got about 5 people on the team, direct team, and then we've got 2 co-founders. So it's about 7 of us in total. Yeah.
And the big news today was you guys just got a $50,000
That's right. Yeah.
grant from Gary Cardone. Yes.
Yeah, Gary's fantastic. I'm really grateful for him. Because of him, we were able to raise $100,000 in 72 hours, because he said, I'll match anything up to 50,000. I hopped into a Twitter Spaces. So Twitter Spaces is a great tool for fundraising, apparently. So hopped into Twitter Spaces, and Gary, just completely on his own. This is totally emergent. I didn't even ask him. Just hopped up on stage, started talking about some of the more recent efforts that we had pursued and the victories that we'd had. And he was like, all right, I'm going to do a match. And we turned around to the online community, raised about $15,000 within 72 hours, just from like random online people that wanted to help us. And then we'd called some people that we knew were looking at donating and were sitting on the sidelines. And so a couple different people came in, wrote some bigger checks, and we ended up actually raising over $100,000 in that 72 hours because of just that match. So it was a really powerful tool for us.
Yeah.
And Gary's amazing. If you get Gary Cardone, if you don't know him, go follow him. He's doing a lot of great work in the space, and I think he should certainly be, people should appreciate his voice. And he's actually really become very strictly pro Bitcoin, telling people Bitcoin is the huge opportunity and they need to be focused on that.
And so you got the right to mine, run a node, custody. What other bills would you like to see passed by the states in the future?
That's a fantastic question, because we've talked about protecting Bitcoin, protect the right to mine, protect the right to self-custody, but that's not really going to help us unlock the true potential of Bitcoin. To be able to do that, we need to pass laws like the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, right? We need to be able to pass laws that help enhance the ability for Bitcoin to balance the grid. We need to pass more laws to help Bitcoin to be able to be used as a spending technology. It's a great savings technology right now, but how can we incentivize the ability for Bitcoin to be spent as money? The big one is going to be capital gains. And so we do have that in our models already. We have the $200 de minimis exemption that we're utilizing, which will help people pay for groceries, pay for gas, pay for coffee without incurring a taxable event. Right now, if you go spend Bitcoin anywhere in America, you are incurring a very a heavy taxable event. And even if you don't have a lot of capital gains that you have to pay, you still have to track it constantly. So it's a big burden. And long term, we want to completely eliminate capital gains on Bitcoin in order to truly unlock the technology and help people to use it as a spending technology and not just as a savings technology.
That, I think, is the ultimate game changer.
Right.
If people can just use Bitcoin on a day-to-day basis, don't have to worry about any of that, it would really embed it into absolutely everything that we do.
That's right.
No, I salute you and what you're doing. If people want to help you guys out, get involved, where should they look? What should they do?
You can go to satoshiaction.io. We have all of our information up there. Most of our wins are up there, although we've been securing some back-to-back wins, so it might take a little time to update the website with our latest ones, but we got our newsletter that people can sign up for. They can see the latest and greatest. I would say that following me on Twitter is probably the best way to get the most immediate information, just because that's where I share stuff right when I hear it, right when I see it. It's going on Twitter. We have our social media accounts on our website, and people can look me up. Generally, I pop up right up top, so easy to find.
All right, Dennis. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Yeah.